Loyalty still means something in this country. Bill Anderson, a 72-year-old farmer, had spent his entire life working the same 1,000 acres of land. But now, after 50 years of supporting our troops, everything he had built was about to be taken away by developers. When his final eviction notice came, it seemed like there was no hope. However, in just 24 hours, something happened that would change his life forever. Hey everyone, welcome back to Tales Unveiled. Today, we have a story that proves that loyalty, service, and tradition are still worth more than money. Let's dive in. Bill had always been a farmer, but not just any farmer. He was a part of a family-run operation that had served both the community and the military for 3 generations. Unlike the huge corporate farms you see today, Anderson Farm was a place where every field had a story and every season was tied to family tradition. Bill's father had started the farm, and his grandfather had helped keep it going during World War II. For 50 years, the Anderson family had kept their farm open to the military, providing a special landing zone in the South Field used to train helicopter pilots. Every week, without fail, Bill would prepare the landing zone for the military helicopters flying in from an airbase 2 states away. This wasn't just any piece of land. This was a critical training ground where pilots could practice night landings and other vital skills. And Bill took it all in stride, just like his father had done before him during the Vietnam War. While other farmers were focused on crops, Bill would stay up late, setting out landing lights for the helicopters, keeping the landing zone clear, and making sure everything was perfect for the pilots. His wife, Martha, was always there to support him. She would make coffee and sandwiches for the helicopter crews during those long, grueling training sessions. She would often say, "Can't expect our boys to train on empty stomachs." And even during harvest season, Bill always made sure to keep the field clear. He knew that military readiness couldn't wait for corn to grow. For Bill, this wasn't just about farming. It was about helping train the next generation of military personnel. Some of the young pilots who had trained at Anderson Farm had gone on to serve in every conflict since Desert Storm. Bill never expected anything in return, but he always felt proud of the small part he played in shaping the future of our country. But when Silicon Valley developers bought up the surrounding land, things began to change. The new owners didn't care about Bill's history, his farm, or the crucial role it played in military training. They saw only prime real estate for their new tech campus. Bill was in the way. They came to him with an offer. "We're offering above market value," they said, but no amount of money could replace what Bill had built. The farm wasn't just land. It was part of a legacy, a crucial training facility that had helped countless pilots hone their skills. The land had history, and that history couldn't be bought. Bill sat at his kitchen table, staring at the final eviction notice. The paper in his hands felt heavy, and for the first time in decades, he wondered if he was going to lose everything. He thought about his father, who had maintained the farm through the Cold War, and his grandfather, who had offered the land for military training during World War II. Now, zoning laws and property developers were about to erase it all. One by one, Bill watched his neighbors sell out. The Montgomery place, where helicopter crews used to rest between exercises, was already marked for development. Down the road, the Wilson family had sold their 200 acres, which used to serve as an emergency landing zone. As Bill watched all this unfold, he sat with Martha, trying to make sense of it. "I don't understand it," he'd say, his voice tinged with frustration. "We've been helping train pilots for 50 years. How can they just erase all that history?" Martha would squeeze his hand, remembering all the young servicemen and women they had helped over the years. She thought about all those late-night training sessions, the sandwiches, the coffee, the long hours. But even she knew, deep down, that time was running out. The developers were taking over, and the military training zone Bill had maintained for so long was slipping away. And so, Bill put up a sign. With trembling hands, he posted a notice that read, "Military Training Zone Closing, Anderson Farm, serving our forces since 1943. Below the sign, he added a smaller note, "Thank you for 50 years of service to our country." Just writing those words made it all feel so real, and for the first time, Bill felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. He didn't tell the military at first. Instead, he kept maintaining the landing zone, just as he had done for decades. But people could see that something wasn't right. Bill wasn't his usual self. His posture had changed. His shoulders were slumped as he set out the landing lights, and his voice cracked when he radioed coordinates to the incoming helicopters. It was clear that Bill was struggling. One day, a young reporter came by, taking photos of the farm and asking about his history. She wanted to know what it had meant to military aviation training. Bill didn't expect much from the article. It was just another story about progress erasing history. But something about the simple sign and the history behind it seemed to strike a chord with people. The photos started spreading through military channels, and soon the story was everywhere. The post read, 5 decades of pilot training ground gone, just like that. It wasn't just another story. It was a call to action. The story resonated with so many people, especially those who had trained at Anderson Farm over the years. They shared their memories of late-night training sessions, of emergency procedures practice, of Martha's coffee and sandwiches. It didn't take long before Bill's phone rang. He was in the barn that evening when the landline rang. He hadn't gotten a call like this in years, and he never thought he'd be getting one like this. "Mr. Anderson?" A voice said on the other end. "Please hold for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs." Bill nearly dropped the receiver. For a moment, he thought it was a prank. But then, another voice came on the line. "Mr. Anderson," the voice said, "I saw the story about your farm. Tell me about it." For the next 20 minutes, Bill talked with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, not about politics, but about service. He spoke about those late nights guiding helicopters in, about watching young pilots grow into skilled aviators, and about the dedication to country that had kept the Anderson family going for decades. He spoke from the heart. "Mr. Anderson," the chairman said finally, "we can't lose training grounds like yours. Give me 24 hours. Bill could hardly hold the phone. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely speak. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs had just promised to help save his farm. After months of thinking all was lost, Bill finally felt a glimmer of hope. "Martha," Bill called out to his wife, "you won't believe what just happened." Martha came running from the kitchen, concern etched on her face. "What is it?" she asked. Bill could hardly believe the words that came out of his mouth. That was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs on the phone. He saw our story, and he wanted to help save the farm. And just like that, Martha started crying. After all the sleepless nights, after watching Bill work himself to exhaustion, someone finally understood. It was a moment of relief, of hope, and for the first time in months, they both felt like they might just be able to save Anderson Farm. Part 2 will continue from here once you're ready. The next morning, as Bill finished his usual morning chores, something unusual happened. The familiar sound of rotor blades began to fill the air, growing louder and louder. Bill stopped what he was doing, looking toward the sky. He didn't know what to expect, but then he saw it. An Apache helicopter appeared over the tree line, followed by 3 Blackhawks. The sight made his heart race. These weren't just any helicopters. Bill recognized the markings immediately. These were the Pentagon's own fleet, the same helicopters used for military operations and special missions. As they touched down on his training field, Bill's mind was reeling. This had to be about the chairman's call, the promise he made to help save the farm. 2 generals stepped out of the helicopters, each carrying a briefcase. Bill couldn't believe his eyes. These were not just any military personnel. This was the highest level of leadership in the armed forces. As they walked towards Bill, his heart skipped a beat. This was real. This was happening. "Mr. Anderson," one of the generals said, flashing his credentials, "we're here to make sure your farm stays exactly where it belongs, serving the United States military." Bill could barely contain his emotions as he led the generals to his kitchen table. Martha was there, as always, offering coffee and making sure the military guests were comfortable. For the next hour, the generals discussed how Anderson Farm would be preserved. The military had decided to designate Bill's farm as a protected military training facility, making it impossible for developers to touch it. "This is a huge win for you, Mr. Anderson," one of the generals explained. The military will now lease the landing zones from you, providing a steady income while ensuring that your farm continues to serve as a training ground for future pilots. Bill's hands were shaking as he signed the documents. He had spent so many sleepless nights wondering if he would lose everything. Now, in just a few hours, it felt like a dream come true. The military was not just protecting his land. They were making sure Anderson Farr would continue to serve the country for generations to come. As the general prepared to leave, one of them turned to Bill and said, "The chairman wanted us to tell you something." Bill listened closely. "He wanted us to remind you that some things are worth more than money, and supporting our military is one of those things." Bill's heart swelled with pride. After months of feeling hopeless, it felt like the world was finally coming together. But that wasn't all. The military had more work to do. The very same day, the generals visited Techscape's offices, the developers who had been so eager to buy Bill's land. When the military officials walked in, the developers' faces went pale. It was clear that the power of the government was about to make things very difficult for them. No more fancy talk about property values or high-end tech campuses. The generals came prepared, and the developers quickly realized their plans had been overruled. They were handed official orders regarding military installations and protected zones. The general didn't mince words when he spoke to them. "Your development plans have been superseded by national security interests," he said. The developers tried to argue, but it was no use. The military had spoken, and their plans for the land were no longer relevant. Bill didn't know at the time, but the effects of the military's intervention weren't just going to stop at his farm. Within hours, other farmers started getting calls. The Montgomery place, which had been marked for development, would remain an heiress area. The Wilsons, who had sold their land, were able to keep their emergency landing zone intact. One by one, all the threatened farms were saved. The military had stepped in, and what seemed like a lost battle was now a victory for those who had served their country in quiet ways for decades. For Bill, this was a moment of pure relief. Anderson Farm was saved, and the legacy of his family's service to the military would continue. The training fields would stay open, and the helicopters would keep landing. And Bill wouldn't have to worry about the developers turning his home into another tech campus. That afternoon, Bill sat in his barn, looking at the closing notice he had posted just days before. It still hung there, as a reminder of how close he had come to losing it all. But now, it seemed like the worst was behind him. Bill knew his family's legacy would live on. The farm, which had been a symbol of service and loyalty for so many years, was safe. The helicopters continued to land on his fields, just as they always had. But now, Bill wasn't the only one maintaining the landing zones. His grandson, Jimmy, was right there alongside him, learning the family tradition and carrying the torch for the next generation. The work was hard, but it had always been worth it. As the sun began to set, Martha made sure the helicopter crews had their coffee and sandwiches, just like she always had. Bill smiled to himself as he watched them practice their approaches, just as they had done for decades. Nothing had changed, except now there was a renewed sense of pride in the air. And so, Anderson Farm stands to this day. It's a place where the past and the future meet, where loyalty, service, and tradition are honored every day. Bill still stays up for night training, just as he had for 40 years. He still says the same thing he said countless times before: "Can't expect our boys to learn in daylight only." Bill doesn't talk much about the day the chairman called. He doesn't need to. Instead, when people ask him about it, he simply points to the new landing lights or lets them watch the helicopters land. What happened to Anderson Farm wasn't just about saving one family's land. It was about showing the world that some traditions of service are worth protecting. And so, Bill's story serves as a reminder to us all. When developers saw prime real estate, the military saw something else. They saw the value in preserving history, in honoring service, and in keeping alive the traditions that help protect our country. Some things, it turns out, are far more valuable than money. If you love stories like Bill's and want to hear more, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales. And while you're at it, check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. As the days passed, Life on Anderson Farm began to return to normal, though in many ways, it felt different. The familiar rhythm of maintaining the landing zones, setting up the lights, and helping guide helicopters continued. But there was now an unspoken sense of pride in the air. Bill and Martha had weathered the storm, and their efforts had paid off. Anderson Farm was no longer just a family farm. It was a symbol of what can happen when people refuse to give up on what matters most. It wasn't just Bill and Martha who were affected by the events. The local community, many of whom had supported Bill over the years, felt the impact too. Anderson Farm had always been a cornerstone of the town. From the early days of Bill's grandfather offering the land for training during World War II to the countless nights that Bill and Martha had spent welcoming military personnel, the farm had been a fixture of the community's identity. After the news spread that the military had intervened, something remarkable began to happen. The townspeople, who had watched Bill and his family stand their ground against the developers, started to rally around the farm. Local businesses offered their support, and families who had once watched on the sidelines began to lend a helping hand. People understood that this wasn't just about one family's fight. It was about preserving a piece of their history, a piece of what had helped define the community for generations. For Bill, this sense of community was everything. He had always known that he wasn't in this alone, but the outpouring of support from his neighbors and friends made it clear just how much the farm meant to everyone. It wasn't just a plot of land. It was a living, breathing part of the community's soul. As time went on, Bill found himself reflecting more and more on the history of Anderson Farm. He'd spent so much of his life working the fields, making sure the helicopters had a safe place to land, and doing what he thought was his duty. But now, looking at the farm through a new lens, he saw it as something even greater. The legacy wasn't just about his family's hard work. It was about the countless pilots who had trained on the land, the military personnel who had come and gone, and the traditions that had shaped the way the farm had been run. Anderson Farm wasn't just a piece of land. It was a symbol of dedication, of sacrifice, and of loyalty. One afternoon, Bill was sitting on the porch with Martha, watching as Jimmy helped guide a helicopter in for a night landing. His grandson had quickly learned the ropes, and Bill couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he watched him work. This was the future of Anderson Farm. Someone who would carry on the traditions, who would ensure that the legacy continued. "Martha," Bill said softly, his voice filled with emotion, "I think we've done something important here, not just for us, but for the whole community, for the country." Martha, who had always been the backbone of the family, smiled and nodded. "You've always known what was worth fighting for, Bill. You've taught all of us that." It wasn't just Bill who had learned the value of service. Over the years, the Andersons had shown the community what it meant to be dedicated to something bigger than oneself. They had shown them what it meant to sacrifice for the greater good, to put aside personal interests for the benefit of others. And now, that lesson had been passed down to the next generation. That evening, as the sun set behind the fields, Bill and Martha sat quietly, content in the knowledge that they had done everything they could to protect Anderson Farm. The fight was over, and the farm had been saved. But what really mattered, Bill realized, wasn't just the land. It was the people who had stood by him, the pilots who had trained on his fields, and the legacy that would continue for generations to come. As the helicopter blades began to fade into the distance, Bill leaned back in his chair and looked at the sign that still hung in his barn. The one that had once read, "Military Training Zone Closing," had now become a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of community. It wasn't just a sign anymore. It was a reminder that, sometimes, the things we're fighting for are the ones that can't be measured in dollars and cents. Anderson Farm wasn't just a farm anymore. It was a testament to the power of tradition, to the importance of loyalty, and to the enduring bond between community and the military that had always served it. And for Bill Anderson, it was a reminder that no matter how much time passed, some things would always be worth fighting for. As the years went by, Anderson Farm continued to thrive. Bill and Martha were no longer the only ones maintaining the landing zones. Jimmy had become a key part of the operation, learning from Bill and carrying on the family tradition. The farm, which had once seemed like it was on the verge of disappearing, was now a thriving hub of activity. Helicopters came and went, training pilots who would go on to serve in the military for years to come. And every time the helicopters touched down, Bill felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that his family's legacy was alive and well. But Bill didn't just take pride in the fact that Anderson Farm had survived. What he valued most was the knowledge that his grandson, Jimmy, was learning the same lessons he had learned as a young man. Lessons of service, dedication, and the importance of doing what's right. Jimmy had learned from the best, and Bill knew that he would continue the work that had started with his grandfather all those years ago. As he watched Jimmy work, Bill knew that the future of Anderson Farm was secure. The farm would continue to serve as a vital training ground for military pilots, just as it had for decades. And as long as he was around, Bill would keep doing what he had always done, maintaining the landing zones, guiding the helicopters in, and making sure the next generation of pilots had the training they needed to serve their country. For Bill Anderson, the fight had been long and hard, but in the end, it was all worth it. Anderson Farm stood as a monument to the past, a symbol of service and sacrifice that would continue for generations to come. And as long as he could, Bill would keep doing what he loved, knowing that some things in life were too important to give up. And so, Anderson Farm remains, just as it always has, a place where tradition, service, and loyalty are still cherished. And while the world around it may change, the farm will always stand as a testament to the importance of preserving what truly matters. Bill's life on the farm settled into a new rhythm after the battle with the developers. It was quieter, but there was a deeper sense of purpose in everything he did. The landing zones were maintained with even more care, and every time a helicopter touched down, it was a reminder of the legacy he had fought so hard to protect. But as much as Bill took pride in keeping tradition alive, he also knew that it wasn't just the helicopters or the military that made Anderson Farm special. It was the people. The community had rallied around the farm in ways Bill had never expected. Friends and neighbors who had watched the struggle from a distance now came forward to help in any way they could. Local businesses sent supplies, and farmers in nearby areas offered their assistance. It was a heartwarming reminder that the bonds of community run deep, and when one of their own was in need, they would rise to the occasion. Even the local schools began to take an interest in the farm's history. Teachers brought their students by to learn about Anderson Farm's role in military aviation training. Bill and Martha would share stories, showing the kids the landing lights, explaining how the helicopters used the field for practice, and giving them a glimpse of the legacy they were helping to preserve. Bill found that he enjoyed these visits, taking pride in sharing the history of his family and their service to the country. It wasn't just about keeping the farm operational. It was about teaching the next generation the value of service, dedication, and community. One day, Bill was in the barn when he noticed something that made his heart swell with pride. A local high school student, who had come by on one of the school tours, had returned with a homemade wooden sign. It wasn't much, just a simple piece of wood with a few words carefully painted on it. "Thank you for your service." The student had left it by the barn door, a small but meaningful gesture of appreciation. For Bill, it was a symbol of everything he had worked for, the acknowledgement of his family's contributions, the recognition of the value of the land, and the gratitude of the people who understood what Anderson Farm stood for. The farm wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It had become a place where people came to honor tradition and the sacrifices that had been made for the greater good. It wasn't just Bill's fight anymore. It was a community's fight, and that, more than anything, made the whole experience worthwhile. As the months passed, the helicopters continued to land, and Bill's routine remained largely the same. He and Jimmy would wake early to ensure the landing zones were ready. Martha would make sure the crews had hot coffee and fresh sandwiches, and the military pilots would continue their training. But something had changed. Bill felt a deeper sense of peace, knowing that his family's legacy would live on, that Anderson Farm had been saved not just from developers, but from becoming another forgotten chapter in history. One night, after a long day of maintaining the landing zones, Bill sat down with Martha on the porch, the cool evening breeze rustling through the trees. They didn't need to say much. They both understood that this fight, this long struggle, had meant something far greater than they'd ever imagined. "Martha," Bill said, his voice filled with quiet reflection, "I never thought it would come to this. I never thought we'd have to fight so hard for something like this. But I'm glad we did." Martha nodded, a soft smile on her face. "I knew you'd never give up, Bill. You've always fought for what was right. And now, Anderson Farm has a future. Jimmy's going to carry on the work, and who knows, maybe one day his kids will be out here too, keeping tradition going. Bill looked out over the fields, where the landing lights still gleamed in the distance. The familiar hum of the helicopters filled the air, a constant reminder of the farm's purpose. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a legacy in motion. I never thought I'd be here, this late in the game, still fighting for something that seemed like it was slipping away. Bill said quietly, but sometimes you have to fight for what matters. And in the end, that's what makes it all worth it. Martha reached over and squeezed his hand. We've done good work here, Bill, and now we've made sure it will last. It was a simple truth, but one that had taken years of effort, sacrifice, and determination to achieve. Anderson Farm would continue to serve the military, just as it always had, but now it was more than just a farm. It was a symbol of resilience, of fighting for what's right, and of the importance of preserving the traditions that have shaped the nation. In the years to come, the story of Anderson Farm will be told to new generations, through school tours, through local stories, and through the memories of those who had helped make it possible. And as long as Bill and Martha were around, they would continue to teach others about the value of loyalty, service, and tradition. For Bill, the fight had been worth it. The farm had been saved, and now it would continue to serve as a living testament to the past, a bridge between the generations that had come before and the ones that would follow. As time went on, more and more people began to visit Anderson Farm, not just for the history, but for the lessons it held. The farm became a place of learning, not just about military aviation, but about the values that had shaped this country. And Bill, with Martha by his side, was there to share those lessons, ensuring that the next generation would understand what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, and to stand up for what was right. The farm wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It had become a living, breathing part of the community's identity, a place where service and tradition were honored every day. And as long as Bill and his family had a hand in maintaining those landing zones, Anderson Farm would remain a testament to the power of loyalty, dedication, and the belief that some things are worth fighting for. And so, Anderson Farm remains, alive and well, its legacy preserved for future generations. The helicopters continue to land, the training continues, and Bill's work carries on. He may not have expected this journey, but in the end, he's glad he fought for what mattered. As the years passed, Anderson Farm became more than just a place where military pilots trained. It had become a symbol of endurance, a place where tradition met modernity, and where the spirit of service and sacrifice was honored every day. For Bill Anderson, now in his 80s, the fight to preserve the farm had transcended beyond protecting his family's land. It had become about ensuring that the values his family held dear would continue to inspire the next generation. Bill had seen a lot in his lifetime. From the early days of his father running the farm during the Cold War to the years of hard work he'd put in himself, he'd always believed in the importance of service. But the struggle with developers had forced him to reflect on the bigger picture, about what really mattered in life. And it wasn't just about holding on to the land. It was about ensuring that the things worth fighting for were preserved. Jimmy, Bill's grandson, had grown into a young man who was more than capable of running the farm. Over the years, he had learned everything Bill had to teach, from maintaining the landing zones to understanding the history of Anderson Farm and its place in the community. Jimmy had become a quiet leader in his own right, never seeking the spotlight, but always willing to step up when it mattered. Bill couldn't have been prouder. One day, as Bill watched Jimmy guide a helicopter in for a landing, he felt a wave of pride wash over him. It wasn't just the way Jimmy had learned the work. It was the fact that the farm was still serving its purpose. The tradition was alive and well, and it was being passed down to the next generation. Martha, too, had become a symbol of strength. Over the years, she had been there through the long nights, the difficult decisions, and the uncertain moments. She had always been the steady hand that kept the farm going, ensuring the crews had the food and coffee they needed, and offering a listening ear to Bill when he needed to talk. Even now, as they both grew older, Martha's determination and resilience never wavered. Together, Bill and Martha had weathered the storm, and now they could see the fruits of their labor. Anderson Farm was thriving once again. The helicopter crews continued to use the landing zones. The military pilots trained just as they had for decades, and the legacy of Anderson Farm was secure. Anderson Farm had become a place of remembrance, a place where people came to pay tribute to the history of military aviation and the service of countless men and women who had trained there. It was also a place of celebration, where the community gathered to honor the Anderson family's dedication to service. The annual Anderson Farm Day had become a local tradition where veterans and their families gathered to share stories, remember the past, and celebrate the farm's role in shaping their future. But even with all the recognition and pride, Bill and Martha never lost sight of what was most important. They never saw themselves as heroes, nor did they seek praise. To them, it was always about doing the right thing, about keeping the farm running because it was their duty, not because anyone expected of them. In his later years, Bill often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. When he first received that eviction notice, it had felt like the end. He had watched so many of his neighbors sell out, watched as the land around him was transformed into something that no longer felt like home. But Bill never gave up. He fought for what mattered, not just for himself, but for his family, his community, and the country he had served for so many years. Looking back, Bill realized that the fight to save Anderson Farm had taught him more than he could have ever imagined. It had shown him the power of community, the importance of loyalty, and the strength of tradition. It had reminded him that no matter how big or small, every person can make a difference if they're willing to stand up for what they believe in. The farm still stood as a testament to all those things: loyalty, service, and the enduring spirit of tradition. And as Bill sat on the porch with Martha, watching the helicopters come and go, he knew that the legacy of Anderson Farm would continue to inspire future generations. "You did it, Bill," Martha said one evening as the two of them sat side by side. "We did it." Bill looked out over the fields, the familiar hum of helicopters in the background, and nodded. "Yeah, we did. We fought for something that mattered, and it was worth every moment." Anderson Farm was no longer just a farm. It had become a symbol of hope, a place where history and the future met, where loyalty and dedication were still valued, and where service to the country was celebrated. The helicopter blades continued to slice through the air, the landing zones remained in place, and Bill and Martha's legacy would continue for years to come. Bill didn't need to be remembered as a hero or a legend. For him, the real victory was in knowing that Anderson Farm would live on, continuing to serve the military, the community, and the generations that followed. It wasn't about the money or the accolades. It was about making sure that some things, some traditions, would never be erased. And so, Anderson Farm remains just as it always has, a place where loyalty, service, and tradition are honored every day. And as long as Bill's grandson, Jimmy, is there to carry the torch, the legacy of Anderson Farm will continue to inspire. Thanks for sticking with us through this incredible story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, take care and keep fighting for what matters.